Hey guys, welcome back to more stories of Karens misbehaving. In this video, an out-of-control Karen stole my heart monitor and gave it to her children, claiming it is just a toy. Here is what happened. Let's dive right into the video. And the first one starts like this. I used to manage the activations department for an ISP. And by the way, this story is from r/malicious compliance. Anyway, I would not say that I managed the team, as my style is they worked with me, not for me. I was simply the department's leader. For some context, the company had been growing for quite some time, but unfortunately not hiring enough staff to cover the growth. I started in the support department before being moved to this position after the entire old activations team quit. Due to the small world it is in the ISP space in my country, I will keep things a little vague. Some background is required. The old team of 3 plus the manager used to have one person work on the oldest tickets in their queue plus 2 on the newest tickets to keep things moving. Just being interrupted by calls, walk-ups and messages. The manager would handle billing and cancellations. The same ticket would often get handled by multiple agents in a day, often the same agent multiple times too. Almost every day they were all doing unpaid overtime. We are all salaried employees to handle the spillover from support throughout the night. When they quit, they had about 1,000 order tickets. Complaints were common, but not outrageous. I knew that was unsustainable given the growth and acquisitions. By the time this story is relevant, we had over 3,000 tickets and almost no complaints, with the same number of less experienced staff. To put that number in a little more perspective, that was 2 to 3 times as many tickets as every other department combined. We made many changes over the time, and I became an expert in the back end of the ticketing system. But the biggest change was that we changed our workflow to a priority system, and everything now had a due date. All new tickets had a due date of the day they came in. If the customer wanted their connection on a different date and the pre-check showed no tag was required, that became the new due date. If a tag was needed, the appointment became the due date. If the customer emailed us against their ticket or any update happened to the ticket, the due date changed automatically from whatever it was to today, so we could be across the developments, as customer request dates and tag dates could be months into the future. Suddenly, the age of the ticket did not matter anymore, just the due date, and this reduced so much double handling, and customer updates were responded to quickly and calls dropped significantly. Now stick with me as all of this becomes relevant. My priorities were handle the cancellations and billing. When done, I followed the same priority as the team unless I was in meetings. The team priorities were, oversimplified, number 1, get new orders and relocations vetted, tags booked and set applicable due dates. Number 2, activate the completed orders or update the customer tag and due date if there were issues. Number 3, important, escalate overdue orders and follow-up escalations, due date. Number 4, activate voice orders. Number 5, finally everything else that was due today. It became a well-oiled machine. The escalations were maybe 0.5% to 1% of our orders. As we had so few complaints and typically raving positive reviews from our customer, the general manager did not really understand how we worked or the depth of the changes that made us so efficient. My daily report was usually skipped in the end of the day meetings as we had minimal issues. He focused on the other departments. The way we work now meant that tech issues or appointment issues were also escalated and resolved quickly, as nothing slipped through the cracks anymore. The internet wholesaler worked really well with us, as we set clear expectations with our customers, and we always had great data to back up the escalation process. Our most remote customers, who had to wait long times for tags, completely understood. Usually a tag was taking a chartered bush flight out there, followed by some off-road driving to get to the customer, so get a satellite internet connection installed. These customers were often hundreds of kilometers from the nearest town and understood the logistics that would be involved and the waiting periods. Very rarely was this an issue. But now, onto the story. Now, while we had so many orders coming in, we had just as many, usually more some days, customers cancelling their services, largely due to the long support wait times or poor quality support response emails. That meant the general manager was panicking about our record, showing that we were losing customers to the board and shareholders. In front of everyone, he had a massive yelling fit directed at me about the company's negative growth, and this was my fault supposedly, and I need to have every customer connected within 3 days or else we escalate it. We have too many orders not connected, no more excuses from the wholesaler. Did I mention they were great and moved heaven and earth for us? Escalating these and getting them connected was our #1 priority, follow them up daily, he's had enough of my team slacking off, etc. Everyone's jaws around me dropped. They knew we were not perfect, but we were the smoothest running department in the company. I saw red and took a deep breath. That's fine. Cue my malicious compliance. After that public dressing down, I immediately sent him an email confirming what he had just said. I got it back in writing. Texts take longer than 3 days, those orders and escalations became our #1 priority. He did not say business days, so I sat with my team and informed them that our ticket queue is gonna be in a world of hurt, but we need to make it clear to him that he does not understand how we work, what we do, and that the way he spoke about us was inappropriate. They are not to stress about the numbers, they are not to do unpaid overtime, I don't care that they are on a salary. Salary accounts for reasonable overtime and this is not reasonable. They are to end work when their shift ends, do not accept time off in lieu. Only accept paid overtime, I will take the fallout. They are not paid to be stressed. Most days we have to work on about 300 tickets total, and today was a Friday. Customer not getting connected until Tuesday, and well, that's 4 days. Escalate. Customer roads impassable due to flood, so tech has to wait for dry weather. Too bad. Escalate. We escalated about 50 new orders that day, which meant Monday we had the usual weekend and Monday orders plus those 50. That day over 100 new orders were escalated plus the 50 followed up. So our queue reflected that we had about 450 tickets due. Less than a third of the new connections got connected even though tech was not needed. Next day the same thing except only a handful of orders got connected. Now we had 600 tickets overdue. By Thursday, support's being hammered by people asking about their connections. Overdue tickets hit the thousands, wait times blew out, orders got cancelled, complaints got raised. Come the next Monday, the support managers were screaming at me to get my department in order. I directed them to the general manager. A meeting was called with all department managers over the current state the business found themselves in. When I was asked what was going on, I simply pointed to the email, referenced the dressing down my team got, and informed him that I was simply following orders. That's ridiculous, use your brain, you should know what should be escalated. I pointed out that I thought I did, right up until you screamed at me in front of the entire company and belittled me and my team. You made it clear that I have no idea what I'm doing and to do what you say. He informed me to go back to the way we operated before and he will review my workflow in detail at a later date. I tried to say it won't be that simple, we need to follow the escalations through with wholesale, also getting our queue back in order will take weeks. He was not having it though, no, the new orders were our #1 priority again, get people connected. I again moved to object, but another angry outburst informing me to do as he says. Cue malicious compliance round 2 and another follow-up email confirming. We stopped following up the escalations as we had too many new order tickets to process, and by the end of the week the wholesaler called an emergency meeting with the company board, a meeting I was not a part of. They were threatening to pull our wholesale agreement due to the escalated orders not in line with their matrix, and we had inundated their staff also. Not only that, we were no longer keeping up our end of the bargain following them up. This wholesaler was where a significant majority of our customers were fed from. After this meeting finished, I was pulled from my seat to explain myself to the board. Emails prepared and with the support and sales managers with me for support and as witnesses, I explained the above. I was cleared to leave. The fallout. My team and I were given a blank check for overtime to get us back in order. Unfortunately, no other staff from other team could assist in a meaningful way, but my team were only too happy to put as many hours of paid overtime the workplace laws would allow. The company also supplied dinners. It ended up taking us over 6 weeks to undo the damage the general manager had us cause with the OT. The wholesaler also reduced the remuneration we got paid, as they no longer considered us a top-tier ISP. My reports were no longer skimmed and the general manager sat with me often to understand how we worked and complimented me on the innovations from my team's suggestions. He also didn't order me around like that again, but more asked for input before making recommendations. We also did get our top tier ranking back eventually. And yeah, ripe stars, I gotta say, this was absolutely textbook, picture perfect malicious compliance and almost a step-by-step guide on how to handle a situation like this if something similar occurred at your workplace. Honestly, props to OP for showing what he and his team is worth and for making the stupid managers and upper management in general understand. In many of these stories, and it seems like also in real life, too many times bosses or upper management are not aware how valuable and important skilled employees employees can be for the company. Anyway, let's move on to the title story, which is titled "Insane Karen Rips Out My Heart Monitor, Claims It's a Toy for Her Kids." I was 14 years old when I had my first heart attack. I was on vacation somewhere hot with my folks when I keeled over in pain, waking up a few days later in a strange white room. Upon leaving the hospital, I was diagnosed with a rare heart disease called Brugada syndrome. While my future prospects looked grim, I was also given a heart rate monitor to avoid any nasty surprises again in the future. Flash forward a decade, and now I get regular checkups at my local hospital to monitor my condition. This is where my story really starts. It was a Friday afternoon when I walked into the hospital waiting room. Usually I would be accompanied by my girlfriend or father, who was just as keen to check my vitals, but this time I ended up going alone due to a clash in busy schedules. I did not mind, it had been years since anything important was said, although I was still urged to visit often just to make sure. I did not like hospitals that much, but I did not doubt that I would have probably died on vacation, if not for one. Note to myself, no wilderness camping in the near future. The waiting room was a mess, even above the usual standards of a Friday rush. A nurse rushed between the reception desk and the back room, weaving between a queue for the receptionist and those loitering in and around uncomfortable plastic chairs. Despite the business, there was only one sound, a high-pitched screaming from two kids chasing each other all over the room. It was immediately obvious how disruptive and annoying they were being, though no one spoke up and no parent was in sight. After checking in for my appointment, I squeezed through the crowd and fell into the nearest available seat, settling in for a long wait. I found myself passing the time by staring at educational posters and leaflets, annoyed that I had left my cell phone behind in my other jacket. I was just beginning to rest my eyes when I suddenly heard yelps and the clatter of plastic right next to me. I turned to see the bratty kids from earlier had run into one of the nurses and caused her to drop a tray of medication. The various multicolored pills and tablets were scattered through every inch of empty space, and it made me think of a children's ball pit. The nurse scrambled to gather up the pills, apologetically pushing her way through the crowd. The kids stared dumbly at each other, then their attention was shifted when a woman's voice the other end of the room called out, "Did you just bump my little angels?" The newcomer was a middle-aged woman, her cell phone glued to her long spindly fingers. When she got no answer, she stood up and stomped until she loomed over the nurse, who continued to clean up the mess. After a tense moment, the woman returned to her seat and the nurse escaped into a different room. You would have thought this incident would have been enough to teach the kids a lesson. Little did I know. As soon as the commotion had cleared, they were running around again, screaming, jumping over chairs and bumping people constantly. I was considering whether or not to intervene on the lackluster mother's behalf until a doctor interrupted me by calling in the next patient, called Karen. The rude woman stood up and moved over towards the doctor. Her kids followed behind her like well-disciplined pups. She told the one she called Tommy to sit and wait here before walking away, the sounds of her high heels growing softer. The room collectively sighed in relief at her departure, the tension easing into the ordinary anxieties and restlessness. Tommy, now without someone to chase or attack, fidgeted on his chair opposite me. To avoid my own fidgeting, I closed my eyes again and waited to hear my name called. I must have been tired, as the next thing I remember was waking up to someone prodding my chest, squinting through wary eyes to find it was Tommy. I had to stand up before he would stop poking at me, but his eyes were still fixed on me. My heart monitor. "Is that a toy?" he asked, still without looking at me. "No, it checks my heart rate," I replied. The small boy looked annoyed and said, "But it was beeping earlier, I heard it," he said, raising his voice. Getting slightly irritated myself, I avoided his complaints and peered over at the slowly ticking clock, wishing this nightmare to end. Sitting back down, the child continued to loiter around me. I hoped ignoring him would leave him to find entertainment elsewhere. Instead though, I felt a sharp pain at my chest and I looked down to see Tommy pulling my heart monitor free. I shot out of my chair, causing him to stumble and fall on his butt. I was furious, but I was met with the worst thing as his mother re-entered the room. The small boy scuttled away to his mom and began talking 100 miles a minute, presumably about me or the heart monitor. Her eyes darted over towards me, flashing looks of disgust and hatred. The other patients did their best to hide in the background, avoiding the situation while no doubt grateful for the juicy distraction from boredom. After calming the boy down, they sat quietly and I felt safe enough to relax while Karen shot me daggers, and she made no move to harass or assault me though. Not yet. Anyway, over the next 10 minutes I had somehow found myself drifting to sleep again despite the danger sitting nearby. And just as it had proven before, this was stupid of me. After relaxing a little too much, I felt another sharp chest pain, only much worse than before. I snapped away to find Karen looming over me this time, my heart monitor in hand. "What kind of adult are you? Toys are for children, you know?" She spat at me before walking over to Tommy. "Here you are, sweetie," as she handed over my heart monitor to him. In rising panic and frustration, I walked over there to snatch it back. Karen stood in the way and pushed me back. I was not able to get my words out properly, the stress was beating my heart like a drum, and I began to feel faint. Karen noticed my weakened state and laughed at me. Other patients, realizing the seriousness, tried to get involved, but each were harassed and fought off by the she-devil. On the verge of a panic attack, the nurse from earlier pushed past Karen to help reassure me, calming me down. After she was happy with my condition, she stood and confronted Karen, who was just shouting non-stop. The nurse calmly swiped the heart monitor out of the child's grasp and went to return it to me, narrowly dodging Karen's attempting to steal it back. The nurse berated Karen for treating vital medical equipment like a toy and told her that if she continued to make a scene, she would be asked to leave. Unable to back down, Karen pushed the nurse, which prompted other nurses and security guards to swiftly escort her to the exit, followed by 2 crying kids. My heart monitor was beeping like a club song, only getting more audible the more self-conscious and stressed I became. Shortly after that, my own name was called for an appointment, though it took me a little while longer until my heart monitor became silent again. Karen was nowhere to be seen when I left the hospital. I assumed she had driven to the next available medical center to find new victims. There was no mention of her in the news later that night, but I bet the staff at that hospital won't soon forget her face should she come crawling back. And yeah, Ripe Stars, I gotta say, I'm a little bit disappointed and I wish that OP would have pressed charges on this ridiculous Karen, but at least the situation sort of got resolved without anyone getting seriously injured. Then again, that Karen would have really deserved some consequences. Either way, the next one is titled By-Law Revenge. So the call about the long grass was kind of a last straw thing. The backstory: my grandpa passed away 2 years ago and I moved into his house. He was pretty healthy, but he let the yard go down a bit, the grass was maintained but the trees were overgrown, his pond and patio were dirty, etc. Our neighbor, years ago, sold their yard to a property builder. Our properties are in an L shape, so our neighbor was using our backyard as her virtual backyard. For the past 2 years, I've been trying my best to maintain the backyard while also working and dealing with my grandpa's stuff. Well, for the past few weeks, the backyard has fallen a bit as stress from work has creeped in and I was sick for a few weeks. Before this, the neighbor has always had nitpicks, but I mostly ignored them, and they rang my door one day to complain about mess in the back, and I told them, I have a life outside this house. If it bugs you that much, you're more than welcome to do the work yourself. Following that, By-Law came by and they were very understanding about my situation and gave me more than enough time to feel better and then mow the lawn. Well, that whole thing pissed me off and I wanted to get the typical white picket fence as there was not a fence and we were passively looking for a dog. So then I decided, screw it, and built the largest fence I could, and since her house was right on the property line, she now looks out the window and instead of seeing my backyard, she just sees a big wooden fence. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. In my life, I've come across many different people from all walks of life. Whether it was from active war zones or boot camps on home soil, I was never far from conflict either. But I never expected to find such fierce and bitter hate from someone living in such a nice neighborhood here. After a few years in active duty, I swapped career paths, focusing my attention into the soldiers of tomorrow as a drill sergeant at my nearest boot camp. This was a lot of hard work, but nothing that I hadn't gone through before, recounting my own boot camp horror stories. And there I was for the better part of 30 years until I was forced into early retirement due to a health issue. While I could have been angry or upset, I accepted my retirement, giving me more time to spend with my family. It was at this point in my life that I decided to uproot and move houses out of the city and into a nicer place in a quiet neighborhood with my daughter Izzy. Izzy had been disabled since birth, but found in recent years her mobility decreased even further, which meant our old house was no longer fit for the purpose. This helped push the move too. I was glad to find that I had many kind neighbors who were happy to see me on moving day, many offering to help or giving advice on the area. One neighbor in particular, Karen, lived directly opposite from me and had been very appreciative that she no longer had to live opposite an old empty plot. Despite her strangeness, many in the community seemed to know and love her, Karen having lived here for most of her life. She even had a social media profile, not something you would have expected from someone verging dangerously on entering their early 50s. My daughter arrived later that afternoon to a welcoming committee of friends and neighbors. I decided to hold a small party in the front yard so that we could introduce ourselves properly. Most interactions were perfectly normal, all except one. Karen, who had seemed quite cheerful and helpful not 2 hours ago, was now aloof and distracted. After a brief hello, she excused herself and went home. While it may have been subtle, I noticed that this particular change in mood was prompted after noticing my daughter. I wanted to be wrong, but I trusted in my sharp intuition and good judge of character. The work started the next morning. While the house was a big improvement on my daughter's needs, there were still a few things to add. Firstly, with a sledgehammer and cement, I replaced the porch steps for a sloped entrance, and then, while taking a break outside, I noticed Karen was making her way over to me and she didn't look happy. Karen was annoyed that the supposedly loud work had woken her up and that it was very rude of me to do work so early. I reminded her that 11 AM was not very early, but she refused to accept it. As the argument continued, so too did her complaints and excuses. Although I never asked Karen's opinion on the renovations, she still had plenty to say about it, calling the change an ugliness that would devalue the neighborhood. I scoffed at her and only seemed to frustrate her more, knowing that she was not being taken seriously. Karen then had the balls to say that I should have not moved here if the crippled kid couldn't manage. Angry at the added insults towards my daughter, I confronted her behavior, though Karen seemed to feel no guilt or remorse about the fact that she said this. She in fact was quite clear about it and that Izzy didn't meet her high standards for living here. As you can imagine, we had little to agree on, and without any way for her to boss me around, Karen left and I continued working. I made sure that the last few changes I made were extra noisy too. The next day, I was sorting through the mailbox when another neighbor came over to give me a flyer. This flyer mentioned an annual riverside picnic being held on the upcoming Saturday afternoon. I was hesitant to go given the other neighborly disputes, but I also didn't want to let the conflict ruin my impression of the area. I had not told Izzy about Karen's complaints, though she felt equally unsure about her presence here, possibly catching on to the difficult glances or hushed words from Karen at the welcome party. After some careful encouragement, we both decided to at least give it a chance, even if we only stayed an hour. I forgot to notice at the time who it said was the main host and organizer of the event. Skip forward to Saturday, and the weather is perfect, which cast off any last-minute doubts about going. My daughter and I have not been able to do much relaxing or socializing since our move, so this proved to be a good time for us both to unwind. When we arrived, we were pleased to find a small group already there, and for a while I thought we were luckily Karen-free. Unfortunately, her loud and demanding whines cut over the noise of conversation, and that hope was dashed. In the same manner as our initial introductions, Karen seemed fine with my invitation, but her mood soured when she noticed my daughter, something neither of us failed to notice. Izzy was immediately unsettled and wanted to go home, the stress of the event already weighing on her. I left briefly to grab us some food before we returned home, but while in the queue I heard Izzy calling out. Looking back, I saw Izzy was going through some of the tics from her Tourette's syndrome, which consisted of short, involuntary yelps. I also noticed somewhat nearby, Karen was playing and talking to some followers on her smartphone, but was increasingly annoyed by Izzy's spasms. I quickly made my way over there, but before I could, Karen got up and approached Izzy instead, starting to shout at her. I moved quicker, darting through the crowd, but when I got back into line of sight, Karen stood alone on the hill as cries of panic erupted around them. I moved with the crowd to the riverside to find that Karen had pushed my daughter into the water. My own instincts kicked in, moving my body quicker than I could realize. The river was not fast, but Izzy had washed some distance away before I managed to catch up to her. Luckily, she had managed to free herself from the wheelchair in the initial fall, or its weight would have dragged her under. I had not even noticed how cold the water was until I saw my daughter turning pale, also exhibiting severe shock. Carefully, I pulled her back to land where others were at hand to help us out of the water. As I turned to look back, what I did see was Karen filming the whole incident from her smartphone and grinning. My daughter apparently ruined her video, so she made one of us instead. After making sure my daughter was alright, I stormed over to Karen, who put the phone between us as a flimsy defense. In amazement, Karen claimed that it was actually my daughter's fault that she fell, the wheelchair rolling off on its own. Karen had remarked and joked about it as if it didn't concern her, before turning an evil glare back to me and cursing me for saving that piece of trash. The cogs inside me turned and I faced straight into full drill sergeant mode, giving her a shouting match that even Karen couldn't keep up with. After a few minutes of stunned silence, Karen was nearly as pale as Izzy was, and feeling satisfied at the result, I returned to my daughter. Izzy now found it difficult to control her Tourette, something that until recently had been a quiet and minor part in our daily lives. It also did not help that I was trying to calm her. There was a growing crowd around us of worried neighbors and nosy passersby that peeked at the unfolding drama through their smartphones. In a flash of temper, I urged everyone back, coming off angrier than I had meant to. This seemed to at least work, with the crowd giving us some breathing room, but one person was edging closer instead. Karen's voice could be heard over the noise saying, "What? Is the show over already?" Turning to my daughter, "Would you stop being so dramatic, you brat? Shut up!" Izzy battled with her own demons while Karen battled for authority, repeatedly shouting the same orders at my helpless little girl. When Karen raised her hand towards my daughter, I snapped. Turning Karen in my direction, I knocked her across the chin in a swift jab, sending her rolling down the hill but resting shy of the water. Whether I wanted it or not, the cops came shortly after that, eager to get the full picture of the afternoon's events. I was allowed to accompany Izzy to the hospital before joining Karen at the precinct to tell my version of the story. From the start of the interrogation, I could tell that things were dire, and what they had pieced together so far was a strong, short-tempered man who had knocked down a beloved member of the community, aka Karen, in front of many witnesses. But I knew that if I let Karen win now, the damage she could do to us would be immeasurable. She would send me to jail and Izzy into foster care. I could not let that happen. Over the next 3 hours, I calmly and repeatedly cooperated to the best I could, and to my relief, things did start to look up for me when time had revealed the darker side of Karen. The following legal battle was fought with our very lives and futures on the line. Karen did everything in her power to label me as a violent and abusive man who struck her down when she was trying to help, boosted by her social media fame and local followers. On the other hand, I had witnesses from the picnic and Karen's own video to thank for our rescue. Finally, Karen was charged with attempted murder and all charges against me were dropped. I wonder what Karen will think when she realizes prison does not have good internet. And here, Ripe Stars, I am so glad that the Karen finally ended up in prison for what she did. Seriously, if that person would be still walking around freely outside, I would be deeply upset. And yeah guys, if you cannot get enough of my content, please don't forget to check out my podcast by searching for Ripe Stories on all major podcast platforms such as Spotify, Apple or Google Podcasts. Furthermore, you can find bonus content by going to patreon.com/ripeyoutube or by clicking the join button here on YouTube. For a small monthly fee, you will get access to dozens and dozens of exclusive videos you won't find anywhere else. Thank you so much for watching and I hope to see you again tomorrow.